Hey everybody, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Jesus, meine, Zuversicht, which translates to Jesus Christ, my sure defense. Very straightforward chorale today. We're just going to hop right into the analysis, so no key signature. We start on C major, we end on C major. I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is C major. However, the first cadence that we have is a half cadence in the key of A minor. So we're looking for a point in which we modulate, and I reckon it happens before this G sharp. Sometimes it happens after, but in this case I feel like it's happening before. So here we start off with our tonic triad C major, then we move to another C major chord, C, G, C, and E, so we don't need to reanalyze. Passing seventh in the bass, passing tone in the alto, and then we get A, C, E, and A, which is our sixth chord, A minor. That I also think is our gateway to the key of A minor. I know this introductory section here, this little fragment with two C major chords consecutively, could be analyzed in the key of A minor as well, just as 2-3 chords. But all in all, when the first thing I hear is two C major chords, I feel like we're in the key of C major. That's just me. I know this looks like kind of an odd modulation, but that's just my take on it. But after our tonic A minor, we have G sharp, B, E, and B. That's a E major over G sharp, which is 5-6, and then we get another A minor chord here, A, E, and C. This is a pretty common half cadential formula here. We have a passing tone in the bass. Our tonic gets turned into first inversion C, E, A, and C. 1-6, no need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Passing tone in the bass, and then we get a 4-3 suspension over our dominant. In cadential contexts, it's pretty common to see this 4-3 suspension over all sorts of different chords, tonics and dominants alike, but it's especially common to see over dominant triads, even outside of cadential situations, this 4-3 suspension. And this is just implying a 5 chord, E, E, G sharp, and B, this A being a 4-3 suspension over the bass. Our next phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of C major, and I think we pretty much spend the entire phrase in C major here, especially with all the G naturals that are prevalent in the texture. So we start off with F major, F, C, A, and A, which is a 6 chord in the key of A minor, and it is a 4 chord in the key of C major. We also have a passing tone here in the melody before we get E, C, G, and C, which is our tonic triad in first inversion. Here we have an interesting thing. A lot of the times when we have a 4 chord in first inversion where the 6th of the scale is in the bass and we connect it to a root position tonic triad, we usually get that leading tone connecting the two voices. But here we see the leading tone connecting the two voices in the melody here between A, which is the 6th of C major, and C, which is the tonic. If you've watched any of my previous videos, chances are you've seen a progression like this where instead of this being in the melody, this is in the bass. But Bach doesn't really have too much control over the melody itself. It's more just the fact that this happened and he identified it, which is pretty cool that we're seeing it in this context. So after our tonic, E is a chord tone, G is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. That takes us to B, G, D, and G, which is 5-6, G major over B, and that briefly turns into root position here when the G and the B of the tenor and the bass, the lower voices, swap. Or they don't necessarily swap, but they the tones that are being used change places. And then that resolves to our tonic C major, C, G, D, and E. Very common to see 9/8 suspensions over root position tonic triads here. G, it's kind of interesting how the suspension doesn't resolve until the next measure, but G is a chord tone as well as E, so we don't need to mark them. We then have A, C, and F, which is 4-6, F major over A, and then we have 3 non-chord tones off of the harmonic rhythm. Chances are we do have a subdivided chord progression here. We have B, G, D, and F, which is G7 over B. That's 5-6-5. Very common to see this ascending pattern, especially in melodic minor, but here we're seeing it in major, which for all intents and purposes is the same as melodic minor. And then that resolves to C major, C, G, D, and E, again with a 9/8 suspension here in the alto. Very common to see these over tonic triads. We then have F, A, C, and D. D minor 7 over F. We know that Bach's, I was tongue-tied there. We know that Bach loves cadential 2-6-5 chords. And then we have G, G, B, and D, which is our 5-chord G major, passing 7th in the tenor. And then the section comes to an end with C major, C, E, G, and C, which is our tonic in the key of C major. Okay, next phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A minor, and I think we start off the same way that we started the previous section, with a modulation basically right at the beginning. We have C major to start things off, C, G, C, and E, which is our tonic triad. And again, this is something that I've been mentioning a lot more recently than in proportion to the rest of my videos, but whenever it comes up I like to mention it. Usually when I see the same Roman numeral, like at the beginning of the chorale for instance, on the same line, I won't repeat it until we see a change of chord. But here we have 2 C major chords. If this measure was on the first system, I wouldn't repeat it, but because it's a new line, I'm rewriting the Roman numeral, and that's just a stylistic thing. I didn't really, I think I just picked it up because it made sense to me intuitively. You don't need to reiterate the Roman numeral here, technically speaking, because it was accounted for on the previous line. I just think it creates continuity between the two ideas. Regardless, this is where I believe we modulate to the key of A minor, and does make an argument for the fact that maybe the C major chord is the point in which we modulate to the key of A minor at the beginning, if that is a point of symmetry between the two sections. But regardless, it's our 3 chord and turns into a bit of an ascending harmony or adjacent harmony sort of thing, where we have C in the bass with A, D, and F sharp, and this isn't a secondary dominant. This is a harmonization of A melodic minor, as we can see in the melody here that's happening, and this would be D7 over C, which is 4-4-2, and we would expect this to resolve to a 7 chord because 7 is a fifth below 4, and we would expect it to be in first inversion because that's typically how the chordal 7th of a 7 chord resolves in this style of music, and that's exactly where we resolve B, B, D, and G sharp. D is a chord tone, F is the chordal 7th, but it's a non-chord tone in this context, and then we're going to see that resolve to our tonic, C, C, E, and A minor in first inversion. F is a non-chord tone, A is a chord tone, and C is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark those, but we do get, I would say, an incidental 6 chord here. It really doesn't matter that you mark this, but I feel like it is a bit of, the chord does make sense in terms of the overall resolution, because 6 does end up going to 2, D, A, F, and B. It's 2-6-5. B minor 7 flat 5 over D. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. That's what I was trying to say up here. I feel like I've said it hundreds of times over the course of these videos, but yeah, it was a tongue tie there for some reason, or a tongue twister. B is a chord tone, D is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark them, and then we get another 4-3 suspension over the dominant here, E, G sharp, this A being the suspension, B, and B. Wait, yeah, that's a B, not a D, sorry. That's a 5 chord, E major. E is a chord tone, D is a little passing 7th before we cadence on A minor, A, C, and A. And for our last phrase, we're going to be revisiting C major. It's going to take our chorale out, fairly straightforward, and it's going to bring us to an end. I believe A minor is our common chord here. I suppose G major could be a common chord, C major could be a common chord. Really, any of these could be common chords in between now and the end of the chorale. For me, this phrase feels undoubtedly C major-like, so I'm just going to analyze it starting from the cadence of the previous phrase. we have G, D, G, and B, which is our 5-chord G major, passing 7th on the bass. E, E, G, and C is our tonic triad in first inversion, C major, passing tone in the bass, and then we get C, D, G, and D. Pretty common little scheme that Bach does here, where he pairs the inner eighth notes in a 4/8 note group as non-chord tones. So we get one accented and one regular, just non-chord tone. And we see this all over the place. In this case, it's the middle two. A lot of the times, Bach will just break it up into these 4-note pairings. But all in all, this is just a G major chord in first inversion. It's the B that's the base of this chord. And then that resolves to C major. C, C, G, and E, which is our tonic in root position. And E briefly takes the chord and puts it in first inversion. We then have F, C, A, and D, which is 2-6-5. Again, Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. D is a chord tone, F is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. Lots of chord tones here where Bach just skips down a third in these situations before we go to the next chord. In this case, it's 5, G, B, D, and D. 2-6-5 to 5, probably the most common perfect authentic cadence in all of the chorales. C's a little anticipation here. G is a chord tone. We've seen this cadential scheme in the previous phrase where we had this pattern, and F is a little brief passing tone before we get C major. C, G, E, and C, which is our tonic in root position. All in all, really not much to write home about here. It's cool to see a 4/2 chord resolved the way it's supposed to. I mean, really, as far as consistency is concerned in Bach's writing and how it fits into the narrative of how the harmony of this time period is taught today, the fact that the 4/2 chord resolves the way that it does is pretty astounding. There have only been like very few instances where the 4/2 chord did not resolve the way it was supposed to, or if there was any ambiguity there. Here, I mean, most 4/2 chords will resolve consistently down a fifth, and the bass will go down by steps. So it's pretty cool that that ends up happening. But I really think that other than that, just the only thing is maybe like where the modulation occurs at the beginning of the chorale. That might be up for debate. I really don't think it's super important. I think the big thing and the big takeaway from my analysis in any of these videos that can be applied to just like a broader non-Bach context is just the fact that there is room for interpretation all over the place, and there usually isn't. Well, actually, is there usually not? I feel like a large portion of the time there is room for interpretation. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video if you enjoyed the content as well. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.